Number 3. Ernesto Bustamante. Ernesto Bustamante was hired on as an assistant professor at the University of Idaho in Moscow, Idaho in 2007. It was his first academic job, and at the age of 27, he was the youngest member of the school's psychology department. He was a popular teacher, and the evaluations written by his students were, for the most part, glowing. However, not everyone was impressed with Bustamante. A few students had some major complaints. Notably, some of the evaluations said that Bustamante was involved in sexual relationships with several female students, and he showed favoritism to those students. The university said that Bustamante was officially discouraged from dating students, but the University of Idaho didn't have any clear rules banning teachers from dating students. Then in 2009, a call came into a campus hotline regarding Bustamante. The caller said that Bustamante was involved in a relationship with a student that had become abusive and coercive. The university asked Bustamante and the student he was supposedly in the toxic relationship with if the information in the call was true. Bustamante denied that he was abusive, and the student said that she didn't want to file a complaint. 6 months later, in July 2010, a grad student went to a university official with a complaint about Bustamante. That was 22-year-old Catherine Benoit. She met Bustamante a year earlier when she enrolled in his class. Eventually, Bustamante became Benoit's faculty advisor. They also got involved in a sexual relationship. As Benoit got to know Bustamante, he told her that he had 5 different personalities. He said that one of the personalities was called the Beast, and another one was called the Psychopathic Killer. Benoit told the university official that Bustamante carried a loaded gun with him all the time, even to class. Benoit said that she knew about the gun because Bustamante held it to her head on 3 different occasions. She broke off the relationship with Bustamante 2 months earlier after the 3rd time he held a gun to her head. Benoit told the university official that she was still afraid for her life. She was also worried that Bustamante may try to ruin her academic career. The university did not initially contact the police, but the university official told Benoit that she should call the police. Benoit did call the police and ask for advice about protecting herself from a potential attacker, but she didn't share any information about Bustamante with them. A month after Benoit made her complaint, the university called the police for the first time about Bustamante. They wanted to meet with him, and they wanted to know if it would be dangerous to do so. After talking to the police, the university decided to set up the meeting. On July 19, 2011, Bustamante met with the same school official that Benoit lodged her complaint with. The school official told him that if he resigned, the investigation into Benoit's complaint would end. Later that day, Bustamante agreed to resign as of August 19th, which was 3 days before the first day of school. On the first day of school, Benoit was at home baking cookies with 2 of her roommates. At some point, she stepped out to the back porch to have a cigarette. Then her roommates heard a series of gunshots. After the shooting stopped, the roommates looked outside and saw Benoit laying on the ground. She had been shot 11 times in the chest and the neck, and she died at the scene. Witnesses saw a man wearing a dark trench coat and a hat walking away from the crime scene. Bustamante was immediately the first suspect. His rented car was found in the parking lot of a hotel less than a mile away from Benoit's home in the early morning hours on the day after he killed Benoit. He was found in one of the rooms. He had laid down on a bed and shot himself in the head. Benoit's family sued the University of Idaho and they reached a settlement of $375,000, which her family donated entirely to charity. Number 2. Haitham Nabil Abdelhamid. In October 2008, 23-year-old Haitham Nabil Abdelhamid was working as a math teacher in Alexandria, Egypt. One day, 15 of his pupils didn't finish their homework. He ordered the 15 students to get to the front of the class and told them to put their hands out with their palms up. They were all going to get a slap on the palm with a ruler. When Abdelhamid got to 11-year-old Islam Amra Badra, he ordered him to extend his hand, and the young boy refused. Abdelhamid took Islam outside of the classroom, and once they got there, the teacher started violently kicking the 11-year-old in the abdomen. After kicking him, he brought the boy back into the classroom. A short time later, Islam fainted, and he was rushed to the hospital. Tragically, he was pronounced dead on arrival. Islam suffered 2 broken ribs and stomach injuries, which caused his blood pressure to drop, leading to him going into cardiac arrest. Abdelhamid was arrested and charged with manslaughter. About a month after Islam died, another young student died at a school in Egypt. 10-year-old Khadija Ala Muhammad was called to the front of the class to be punished for not finishing her homework. When she got to the front of the class, she collapsed. She couldn't be revived, so she was rushed to the hospital, where the 10-year-old died. She had supposedly heard about Islam being killed by a teacher for not finishing his homework. A doctor said that the idea of being killed by a teacher terrified the young girl so badly that she died out of fright. Abdelhamid went to trial 2 months after he kicked his student to death. His lawyer said, "Hitting a child is not banned in schools, and my client did not break the law." But that wasn't true because physical discipline in schools in Egypt had been banned by ministerial decrees since 1998. However, even though physical discipline was outlawed, the practice continued. The problem is that teachers in Egypt are poorly paid, and their classes can have up to 100 students. In a lot of cases, teachers just find it easier to beat children to keep them in line. Abdelhamid was found guilty of manslaughter. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison for kicking to death his 11-year-old student because he didn't finish his homework. After the trial, the Egyptian education minister promised reform was coming. But 6 months after Islam's death, there was a third incident at an Egyptian school that made international headlines. A 12-year-old boy at a school in Cairo was sent to a staff room several times because he was delivering messages between teachers. On the student's third visit to the staff room, a teacher who was on their break in the staff room became annoyed with the student, so he threw a kettle of boiling water in the 12-year-old's face. The boy suffered second-degree burns, but survived. The teacher was arrested and charged with assault and abuse of authority. Number 1. Raymond Payne. In the summer of 1975, Debbie Gamma was 16 years old, and she lived with her family in Erie, Pennsylvania. On August 7th, Debbie got into a fight with her mother, Betty, and she stormed out of the home. It was presumed that she was walking to the beach. That night, Debbie didn't come home. Betty thought she had run away. She searched for her daughter, but assumed she would return home after she got over the fight. 4 days later, the police broke the news to her that Debbie was never coming home. Her body had been found floating in a nearby creek. Copper wire had been tied and embedded around her ankles, wrists, and neck. The medical examiner determined that she had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death. The police followed up on a few leads, but no arrests were made in the weeks after the murder. The lack of progress in the case frustrated Debbie's mother, Betty, so she hired a private investigator who began to trace the source of the copper wire. The copper wire led to someone that no one expected. It was Debbie's favorite English teacher at her high school, 39-year-old Raymond Payne. Over a year and a half after the murder, the police brought Payne in for questioning. During the 400 days that the case was unsolved, Payne continued to teach at the school where he once taught Debbie. The 39-year-old teacher said that on the day that Debbie disappeared, he was driving around in his truck, drinking beer, smoking marijuana, and he had taken 2 pills that were similar to barbiturates. He came across Debbie, who was walking down the road, and he asked her if she wanted a ride. Debbie agreed and got into his truck. He said that he gave her 2 pills, and she ingested them. He then told her that he was a photographer and asked if she would pose for him. She supposedly agreed. Payne said that he decided to take it a step further and asked her to do something a bit more provocative. He wanted to take photographs of her in bondage. He said that his 16-year-old student agreed to be in the bondage pictures, so he stopped off at a Kmart and bought some clothesline. He drove her to a wooded area, and then he walked her deep into the woods. He said that he got her on her knees and tied her up by her ankles and her wrists. He wrapped the clothesline around a tree, then around her neck, and then he tied the other end of the clothesline around another tree. Payne said that after Debbie was tied up, he realized he left his camera in his truck, so he went back to get it. Once he got to his truck, he smoked some marijuana and loaded his camera with film. He walked back to where he tied up Debbie and found her dead. Payne said that she must have passed out because of the drugs. He swore that he didn't kill her and that her death was an accident. He said that he untied the clothesline, picked up Debbie's body, and loaded her into his truck. He took her body home, and once there, he tied her body to several cement blocks with copper wire. He then dumped her body in a pond on his property. 2 days later, her body rose to the surface, so he decided to move the body. He ended up dumping her body in the creek where it was found shortly afterwards. The police didn't really believe Payne's story and thought that he was more involved in Debbie's death than he was admitting to. They really doubted that the 16-year-old agreed to pose for bondage photographs that were to be taken by her 39-year-old teacher. They also didn't think her death was an accident. The police interviewed a man who was incarcerated with Payne. He said that Payne talked about the murder in detail with him. He said that Payne admitted that he slipped pills into Debbie's beer bottle. Once she was intoxicated, he took her to the woods where he tied her up with a clothesline in the same manner that he described to the police. Payne then started to sexually assault her, and she begged him to stop. This angered Payne, so he pulled on both sides of the clothesline, strangling Debbie to death. Payne ended up pleading guilty to a general count of murder. A panel of 3 judges later found him guilty of first-degree murder, and he was given a mandatory sentence of life without parole. Payne began filing appeals in 1979. He claimed that he didn't sexually assault Debbie, and he didn't physically strangle her. He thought that since he didn't sexually assault her, and that her death was an accident, he should be found guilty of a lesser charge, like manslaughter. That initial appeal was denied. Debbie's family and friends tried to move on with their lives after her death. Debbie's mother, Betty, hated Payne more than she thought she could hate anyone. But then 6 years after the murder, she started to let go of her hate. She eventually came around to forgiving Payne. She then did something truly remarkable. She met with Payne in prison. She said that when Payne entered the room and saw her, he started crying. She hugged her daughter's killer and told him that she forgave him. In 1997, he filed an appeal to have the male DNA that was found inside Debbie, which was supposedly evidence that he had sexually assaulted her, compared to his DNA. Payne's lawyer argued that the male DNA found inside Debbie would prove that Debbie had sex before she died, but it wasn't with Payne. That appeal was denied, so Payne kept appealing. In total, he appealed his conviction 6 times. In 2014, the district attorney agreed to have the DNA compared. It turned out that the male DNA found inside Debbie did not belong to Payne. Payne's lawyer said that this was proof that he was telling the truth about how Debbie died. Also, since Payne didn't sexually assault her, this made the first-degree murder charge excessive. In September 2017, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled 2-1 that the DNA results weren't enough evidence to overturn his conviction. They said that Payne was never charged with sexual assault, and he methodically constructed the conditions that caused Debbie to die. It looked like Payne, who was 80 at the time of the ruling, would die in prison. Then, 2 months after the ruling, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court made a rare move. It vacated the ruling against Payne and announced that a panel of 9 judges would review the case. That is expected to happen sometime in 2018. Thank you so much for watching today's video. If you liked it, please subscribe for more videos just like it. Please don't forget to visit criminallylisted.com, where you can suggest cases and buy merchandise. Please also check out our Patreon page, where you can get access to an exclusive podcast. But that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.